It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Montserrat Castelló, full professor of educational psychology and leading international scholar in the field of academic writing. Um, Dr. Castelló is director of the Research Institute on Psychology, Learning and Development at Universitat Ramon Llull and director of the research group Ciències, focused on identity and new trajectories in education. She has held several leadership positions in international research organizations, including EARLY and EFTO. She's also a full member of Institut d'Estudis Catalans and has played a key role in promoting research and doctoral education both nationally and internationally. Her work has made a significant contribution to our understanding of how students and researchers learn to write, participate, and position themselves within academic and scientific communities. Throughout her career, she has published more than 200 scientific contributions and has become a recognized reference in the study of researcher writing and identity development. Today, she will share her expertise and insights on this topic. Please welcome Dr. Castelló.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you for this kind invitation, presentation. Sorry for the delay, but I understand that sometimes it's difficult to regulate because we don't have these 10 minutes to change session, so it's a little bit difficult. I was just a little bit worried for the next section, so let's see if I can speed a little, but I don't know. I've seen that the title in the abstract, it's not the one. So it's the one. Fortunately, I don't know because I haven't checked the abstract. Fortunately, the abstract is the correct one. Anyway, so I'll add something to the. Let me start by adding something to the kind presentation, something that has not already been said about me. So that's all right, yeah. And that was here 30 years ago. I was studying here psychology degree, and I saw the thing in the lab. So that was horrible, and that was maybe that the thing that convinced me that I was not going to be an experimental psychologist or cognitive psychologist, and I moved to an unexplored territory at that moment here at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. What was the socio-cultural approaches, Vygotsky, and so on. So I was worried about why, how, when do we write in real scenarios. I was not interested in controlled experiments or writing in a lab or in 1 hour, because that's not, we know at that time, I thought that we already knew that something will happen in the control scenario if we teach people to do something. And then when we move into context-based classrooms or life, where multiple variables are at the play, things are different, and the whole activity is another thing. So studies at that time in writing in the European context were mainly on the cognitive side. So I used to describe my situation at that point, at that moment, with a joke. Usually I explain it in Spanish. I hope it worked in English. It's a psychologist joke, sorry about that. It's someone that is coming back home at night, a little bit drunk, and suddenly he realized, oh, I lost my wallet. And he started to look the wallet under the street light. And a policeman appeared and said, well, what are you doing? I'm looking for my wallet. And the policeman asked, and is here where you lost your wallet? And he said, no, but here is where the light is. So that's in psychology, the street light effect, or the Drunkard's search. So fortunately, I wasn't alone. There was a group, a big group of researchers all around the world that helped me. I learned a lot about them, and especially a great team in which I am working. Still, I am working with these people. Some of them are from here, the Autonomous University. We have an inter-university team in Barcelona with people from the Autonomous University, the Ramon University, where I am located now, and the Open University in Barcelona. And everything I will explain today, we have been moved 15 years ago into doctoral and research writing. So I'll talk about that today. And everything I will explain is on this website. Sorry, here is better? Okay, it's on the website. So I will control this, but I need to control this. Anyway, something, maybe if I put myself there, because someone you said that, see the cables. Is that better now? Okay, okay, so everything is on the website. You can check the website, and the resources I will also talk about, I will refer to, they are in an open base here. So everything you can check it there. So the contents are as follows. So first I will focus on what do we mean when we talk about research writing from our perspective, and which is quite similar to the motto of the conference, an unbounded journey from a sociocultural perspective. Then I'll focus on the bunch of last year research that we've done on writing regulation processes, because I think that it was and still is for me one of the major worries when it comes to research writing. And I'll try to distinguish, maybe problematizing between self, co, and socially shared regulation. And also I will show some challenges that we faced when we tried to research these aspects, not just when we try to research, but also when we try to teach. And I'll try to focus on some tools, especially tools that are twofold, and we use them both in research and for pedagogical purposes. That they also have some challenges, so I'll try to explain them. And then I'll finish with some ideas, some implications regarding teaching research writing, especially now in the Gen AI era, but in general too. So let's move to the first point, research writing. One of the first characteristics of research writing is obviously that we can characterize it as epistemic writing. It's obviously a kind of reflective problem-solving process to transform not only data, but also ideas into knowledge. And that involves necessarily critical thinking. And a nice way to put or to talk about critical thinking is that of the Jorge Luis Borges. It's, an excellent writer, but it was also a librarian in Buenos Aires before the Gen AI era. And he put, I think very nicely, he talked about his work, that's in Spanish, but I translated. He said that organizing libraries at that time is exercising in a modest and silent way the art of criticism. And I would say that writing research genres is also exercising in a much less modest and silent way the art of criticism. It can be, it can be another thing, but it can be. And this kind of criticism is visible into the way in which previous research is referred into our text or into our research. It's also referred or it's also visible in the role and function that we grant to this previous research. It's also necessary to distinguish critical contributions from, simple repetition in research. So it's totally crucial when we talk about research writing. Second characteristic is its dialogic and collaborative nature. And in this case, I'll refer as dialogic not only because intertextual characteristics, referring to other texts when you are writing your own text, but also because the intratextual characteristics. We all know that this dialogical intertextual activity has to do with entering into a particular type of conversation. It's a conversation in which there are many voices, especially for novice writers, many well-known voices, and you have to put your voice there. So you have to just acknowledge first the other voices, but also distinguish your own voice from others. And that's difficult. And it's difficult also because it varies across researchers' communities, time, networks, and also because there is this intratextual characteristic. And I know this image is a little bit disturbing, maybe, but I think it's illustrative. It shows what I want to explain about the inner dialogue that we carry on when we try to discuss with other texts when writing our text, but we have these voices, inner voices, representing the community to which we are referring to. So this dialogue within the writer's mind is one of the things more difficult for the students, especially at the doctoral level, because it's complex dialogue. And it's complex dialogue because it's quite connected with developing your own identity as researcher. It's not complex because of the linguistic characteristics of the genres, the research genres only. That's something that you need to learn. But it's also difficult because you have to position as a researcher. You have to think as a researcher. You have to know the community. You have to be an insider in order to produce this kind of inner dialogue. And that's something that I think it's relevant when we talk about writing regulation. And it's something that is very difficult for the students. This is a quote from Berta, one PhD student. She was at the beginning of her thesis writing, and she said, I feel a very close identification with the community I am addressing. Although I know I am not an important part of this community, they are not going to cite me, which is also, I think, an example of what Ivani already said, that awareness of feeling part of the community is not enough. You need the recognition from the community. You need to be there. You need to have a voice in the community. And the third characteristic of the research writing is that the one of the hybridness is it's a hybrid activity. And it's hybrid not only because you always need reading, discussing in order to write. You have to read other texts, you have to discuss with others, maybe co-authors, but also others researchers, but also because you have to produce this kind of what we call transitional texts that are not mere drafts, they are something different. For example, this is a kind of transitional text. This is something that we did in our team. So transforming, and many of us, we do usually, that transforming a presentation, a conference presentation into a paper, marking, discussing, and this is not a draft yet. It's not. It's kind of text in which we explore, we elaborate ideas, but we need that to explore and elaborate ideas. And that comes before the communicative writing. So we move towards communicative writing, but this is before. And no one can understand that if you are not part of the co-authors. That's another kind of transitional text. difficult for the students. This is raw data from input log writing. So how to transform that into a graphic that can be embedded in a text, that means a lot of transitional text. Again, text, graphics, whatever, multimodal text. And also it's a hybrid activity because, as I said, multimodal, it involves multiple and evolving genres. Still, research articles, theses, dissertations are pervasive, are much valued in some disciplines, but we are more and more required to do many other kind of communication. And all these communication channels and all these products are, in a sense, multimodal. So let's move. If this is what, and that's our definition in the team, if this what we consider research writing, that requires a lot of regulation and a kind of very specific writing regulation. So let's move to what we understand by writing regulation. I'll try to explain first with a metaphor. So the simple one, the climate regulator devices. So that's very simple. We all know what's that, right? That's something that can control the temperature of a room, of a house, of, I don't know. But it's very simple. It's one single variable. This tool has to control the temperature, outside temperature. But that's not how smart houses, for example, function today. So that's another kind of much more sophisticated regulation. And that implies, well, that you can obviously control the temperature regarding what it's the climate outside, but you also can control many other things. So the house appliances, the alarm, whatever. And these systems, usually, I don't have in my house, but they say that they learn from your habits, from your preferences, from the consequences. If you do regularly a kind of things, they can learn from these things and they adjust to these goals, needs, purposes of a family. So I think this is a better metaphor for research writing. But you need goals, you need purposes, you need regularities for the system to learn how to regulate. And this is the definition we end up for now when we talk about writing regulation. First, we consider it's a complex, like these smart houses devices, complex, recursive, and socially situated activity. It's not the same to regulate for a specific journal, to modify, to adjust than for another. It's not the same here than in another community. It's not. No, it's socially situated and involves cyclical thought, action, and emotion dynamics. I'll come back to that later. Second, characteristics, it takes place at all textual levels, from word to disciplinary discourse level and throughout the writing process. And we have also evidence that it consists of both explicit decision-making processes, so it's something that we decide, but also implicit adjustments, in some cases, quite unconscious adjustments, which can serve different purposes and different functions. But this is not what we found in doctoral students or novice researchers when they write. This is the definition of Nuria. So this is how she was talking about her thesis writing. He said, well, we make bricks. So during the first years of the thesis, you are making bricks. Now, what you will do with the bricks, that's what you do not know. Then, of course, you see the weather gets worse, there are clouds, it will rain, so you have to build a house, but the plants do not breathe. Then you say, well, I'll build a wall, and he, the supervisor, sees the wall and does not like it. So the external variable, the claimant. Outside the room is the supervisor, and that's all. And we keep doing, and that's all. So how we can teach them, how we can move them into a more complex and self-centered regulation, how we can explore first this thought, action, emotion dynamics, because that's difficult to catch up, that's difficult to explore. So one of the tools that we have been using for the last years is this very simple tool that serves both purposes, research and teaching purposes. We call it journal plot, and this is you see a two simple, two axis graphic. Here in the horizontal one is the time, and here are the highs and lows of the significant experiences. And that's a visual, offers visual information about significant experiences and emotions, because high and low means the emotional load of the experience. And this is a way to start thinking about what has happened in this writing session, what has happened this week or this month or this period in which we have been working in writing an article. And we do that with students, but also with supervisors. And then we compare, we confront these two representations. And what we found in some research is three profiles between among doctoral and also post-doctoral graduates, postdoctoral students. We found three profiles. First profile is that one that we have called it productive, because the pattern is, as you see, very positive, rather stable, and it's quite horizontal. Things happen. There are some lows, but they are in the positive emotional side, and there are people that produce quite easily and produce different type of texts, not just research articles during the PhD. This is first profile. Second profile is the pattern is typically that way. They start with very challenges, issues, emotionally very low. They try to deal, they struggle a lot. They try to deal with the problems, procrastination, blocks, anxiety, whatever. And they start to feel better when the production goes better, and we call them productive struggles, because they finally produce what they expected to. And finally, we have this pattern, quite frequent too, which, as you can see, this is very, very variable, with high lows and high emotional peaks and lows. And it's like coast roller, so it's up and down all the time. And typically they are the less productive ones, and we call them struggles, because there is this struggle like in the second one, but they don't solve the situation. This is one of the challenges that we have, to catch these dynamics of thinking, doing, feeling during writing. The other challenge is to confront this with what is being produced, the text. And here we found very useful the prior notion of text as artifacts in activity, that we have interpret in such a way that we use successive versions of, or drafts of a text, as evolving artifacts for authors to think about the content and the rhetoric situation, so as mediating tools to evolve as authors. We do that in formative, in teaching for pedagogical purposes, but we do that also in research projects. And this is this allows us to see that many PhD students do not consider texts as artifacts that can help them to think more, but they consider that academic texts are normative, should use specialized lexicon and a fixed structure. And they say this in a very negative way. So that's probably because we or someone said that or just transmitted that. With the best of the intentions. We ask them to cite, we ask them to use specialized lexicon, but the idea is, wow, it's a very restricted, I cannot do anything. So that prevents them, that's quite difficult. If you hold this conception, it's quite difficult to use text as artifacts in activity, something that help you to think, and prevents them to reflect upon the linguistic resources, to use them strategically, because it should be normative, not strategic for them, and to position and reach their objectives. And they tend to look quite quickly, maybe too quickly, for the correct or the good final version of the text. And we have multiple examples. This is one example of Sophia. She was the reviewer. I'll talk to that, I'll come to that later. This possibility of acting and playing different roles when you are learning to write research. And in this case, Sophia was a reviewer of Maria's text, and she was trained to offer only suggestions, indirect comments, and that's what she said. You should change the word deficit, change the expression at least. For during, I would delete all the sentence, I don't know, one of these sentences, and that was all. And then she probably thought, because that's a seminar and I am at the seminar, she probably thought, well, in doing the revision, I just want to offer you what I consider to be suggestions. These are not suggestions, as you can see. This is not the absolute truth. We will comment on that during the class session, okay? That's the indirect way. But the first was, okay. Also, to catch this evolving text, what we do in research is to use any kind. We started with Camtasia, but now there are lots of free screen recorder tools to transcribe all the video recordings of the writing activity. And this allows us to do in-context analysis of actions as they appeared in real time. We also use other kind of more fine-grained software like input log that, as you know, record all the actions done when writing successive drafts. What I think it's maybe a contribution, or what I think it's relevant here, is that what we do with all this information, the journal plots or the thoughts, the emotions and the actions and the evolving drafts, with all this information, we tried to create an integrated unit of analysis. Because if you don't create an integrated unit of analysis, you don't catch the cyclical dynamics of the writing regulation processes. And we call it the regulation episode. And this means that we use this unit of analysis to understand this interplay between text development and writers' actions through thoughts and emotions. And using that unit of analysis, we started to find some evidence of socially shared regulation. And this is an example already published that maybe some of you already know, but I think it was the first example we found about co and especially socially shared regulation. That was a pioneer study in which we were looking for expert writers writing an article in their natural environment. So they were using the time they need, and we were using all these tools you've seen. The journey plots come with an interview after the journey plot is done. So some journey plots were done, then we discussed them. And what we found was that this is the translation of the text in evolution, so the Camtasia screen recorder. These are the words, and this is a single sentence. And this writer, she invested more than half an hour to just hedge, as you see, this sentence, just changing little things. And what was the astonishing thing, what astonishes us, it was that when we asked, what was the problem here? She said, oh, there's no problem here. I would say, well, it's no problem. You invested 45 minutes in that sentence. Maybe it's a little bit problematic. And that's a, well, yeah, it's problematic, but they were expert writers. And she said, well, these authors I'm citing here, so I expect one of them at least to be, it can be potentially a reviewer of this text. And if it's not a reviewer, it's going to be for sure a reader. And it's a colleague of mine, but I'm very, very far away of his epistemological approach. And I want to be clear and to make clear my stance, but at the same time, I am criticizing them. So I want to find a way. I want to find a way, not to be polite, to find a way to be there in a certain way. And that implies that you have this inner conversation I was talking about some minutes ago. So you are representing the reader in your mind, and you are imagining the reaction of that reader or group of readers, and you are hedging the sentence with no problem in this case, because she was an expert writer, until you feel that this is appropriate for this community to which you are addressing to. And we use with our students to start to help them to reflect on how do you position in your community, because the example we saw before also implies that you know your position in the community, you know what is your role, and you hedge differently if you are a PhD, or if you are a peripheral in this community, or if you feel you have a central role. So you help them to reflect on the role they have in the community using the network plot, which is another plot that we just created with visual information. Visual information, why, you can ask? Because after many years of just asking interviews, we found that they don't talk about the processes, because they don't know that this is something relevant. And visual information, it's a way to, reflect on these things. And in this case, as you see, this is the participants research network in the scientific community. So the individuals or the group they interact with, and we ask them to use circles, bigger or smaller, depending on how important they consider this group, and closer or far away, depending on how much they interact with them. And then we ask whether they publish with them or not, why, in which occasions, and this type of things. Okay, let's move to the third point. How to organize teaching in this new ecology of writing that the generative AI scenario put us. So first, I want to summarize what we know. We know, I think we know, we have enough evidence, and we knew that before AI eclosion, that to internalize strategies, guided participation in communities of learning are important and necessary, and increasing awareness through dialogic conversations, awareness about your own way of deal with writing around text, processes, and playing different roles, acting as reviewer, acting as writer, acting as editor in a small community of practice, we know that this helps to self and co-regulate. These are instances of co-regulation because there are someone there helping you to do that. There are someone there guiding the participation, and this is relevant. We knew that for years. Another thing is something that some authors also mention, how we put into play this, how doctoral students, but students in general, use these strategies that we teach them and help them to use in a strategic way, and to act strategically to externalize this regulation. We know also that positioning as writers, as researchers in your community is crucial. And that's a little bit more difficult because this is, the imposter syndrome and these things. Second, this is only possible if we respect complex writing situations. If we simplify what is research writing, we are talking about a different thing. That's not the scenario we need to prepare them for. And this is one of the examples. There are many when we talk about writing, but this is one of the examples that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And we also know that navigating the social dimension of writing, so discussing with others, showing drafts, having different co-authors, presenting at communities, this navigation also helps. And this is part of what we call socially shared regulation, because this is something that it cannot happen without the community helping you to regulate and to externalize what you have learned. Okay, so it's not only increasing the students' knowledge about research writing, disciplinary context, and genre, but also learning when, how, and why certain specific actions should be taken during the writing process, and being aware of how they contribute to the text and the writer's development. Okay, what the ecology of the, what else we can say now in the, the Gen AI era? I know it's late, but I am saying a couple of things. First, it's a matter, I think, and this is not, it's easy to say, but it's not easy to put it into practice. It's a matter of thinking with AI, not AI thinking for us. And when saying that, I am totally aware that you must pervert the Gen AI, the LLMs, you must pervert what they do, because what they do is offer something that looks like finished. So it's not for you to think, it's for you, I'm doing it for you. So we have to just twist this thing to help or to ask them, help us to think. And second, from this perspective, these LLMs or Gen AI does not eliminate regulation, but it increases the need for strategic regulation. And what we do, some examples, we started to do something, and this is only one example. The other one was explained, I think, in another session, this is an example of thinking with AI. We ask in our seminars to the PhD students, we ask them some things that we already did. So they write the introduction for an article, for example. We ask them to analyze the rhetorical structure of the text, identify critical features of authorial voice, also genre characteristics, whatever. These are things that we already did for many years. And then we ask them, okay, now you have a gap, objectives, and this general framework. put this into a model of AI, wherever you like, and ask the machine to produce an introduction. And then we evaluate, we compare your own introduction and the, the AI introduction, and critically evaluate the strengths and limitations of AI-generated academic text. And we reflect on the relationships between this use, writing development, and your identity. What do you want? What is your goal? How are you there in your text, in the machine text, and whatever. This is only one example. Oh, that's again. So we discuss these things. But there are many examples already of using AI to promote reflection. This is also some examples, or for planning and regulation, or for feedback. I think these situations help students to develop better than using AI for writing, because they don't know, they cannot evaluate the product, still they cannot. And this is connected with what Chuck Benjamin was saying when he reminds us that how we are developing as writers is closely tied to how we develop as people. Because writing is something, research writing at least, but probably all writing, is something that goes with development, and it's writing development, and in this case connected with identity development. And I like very much, although this is a very old quote, but I like it very much, and it has been a partner of my thinking for many years, so I use it usually, because I think it's important to keep in mind that experience is not what happens to us, it's what we do with what happens to us. And that's all. Hopefully in time. Thank you very much.